Good afternoon. Before the pandemic, I had a plan to show up in my wheelchair on stage, to show how things were different for me, how I don't have the option of taking public transport, and how I need my father to drive me everywhere. And that before traveling, I need to question every single thing. Question whether my health can take it, whether I can access the venue, whether it's even worth it. But now, with the threat of COVID-19, we all have to think twice before traveling. Before the pandemic, most would start their day thinking that nothing would get in their way. But the virus pushes us all to face our vulnerabilities as human beings. Right now, it's not safe for a lot with disabilities to go out, let alone travel. But what is pressing for us now is that when infected with the virus, we have to voice louder that we are worthy to be treated no matter the high rise in cases or us having a low survival rate. Our voices are getting buried even more merely because of disability being a part of us. New York Times published an article in March titled, "Whose Life is Worth Saving?" and that those with disabilities are afraid of not making the cut. I'm afraid of not making the cut. I'm from the vulnerable group, the group with pre-existing health conditions. I was born with a disability. This vulnerability is part of my origin. When I was 1, I was diagnosed with myopathy. All of my muscles are weak, including my heart and lung muscles. That before traveling, I need to charge my breathing machine and not be full to avoid breathing difficulties. This is not to complain, but just illustrate part of my origin. That I'm a human being with a disability. Origin, by definition, means the starting point. It is a source for us to derive something for the eventual rise. It is not our end, seal, fate, or doom. Which begs the question, are those with disabilities able to derive anything substantial besides pain and hardship? Can we rise and bloom from our origins? When I was 6, I could barely run. My muscles were weak, but I wanted to be part of sports day. I was carefree and curious to try new things. But I could not jump. I could not race. When starting to run, my classmates already reached the finish line. My heart sunk, but I pushed myself forward and took in a lot of stares. Stares from other parents, stares from older kids, stares from peers. I knew that I was different, but I did not understand the attention. Strangers would say, "Aw, look at her. She walks like a penguin. How cute." Then they'd walk away and say, "What's wrong with her?" I know that I walked differently. It was more of a wobble, but I can't change the way I walk. It's the only way I can walk. I took part on sports day to learn and grow, but judgments buried me in darkness. My darkest moments in life were actually at the hospital. During childhood, I was hospitalized every other year for months. By the age of 9, I was already hospitalized 5 times. My heart and lungs are not only weak, they're also underdeveloped. And because of this, I easily caught pneumonia. Pneumonia led to the buildup of phlegm in my lungs, that during one hospital stay, one of my lungs eventually collapsed. Ever since then, I wear a breathing machine whenever I lie down. Once when I was finding it really hard at the hospital, my mom told me that there are always more forms of ease to aid you with that one hardship. Back then, I honestly didn't understand my mom, but later in life, I got to see. Like before my senior year of high school, I had to go through an 18-hour-long spinal surgery. My spine was too weak to support my body, and doctors had to figure out how to ventilate my lungs during the surgery just to prevent it from collapsing. Because of this, there was a 20% survival rate and a high risk of getting paralyzed. But then there were a team of doctors, a team of nurses, physiotherapists, and occupational therapists, a community of loved ones that came during visiting hours, and a lot of medical devices to help me. There were more forms of ease to tackle this hard reality. The reality where I was bound to the hospital bed and pushed to ask myself, where do I go from here? 2 weeks after the surgery, I could stand, and a week later, I walked home. But even after fully recovering, some discouraged me to study. They would say, you don't need to try. What's the point? Or, it's a shame if you pass because you cannot really use your education. Out of frustration, I'd say, that is not useless if I study. But whenever I voiced, they'd say, no, you misunderstand. But I know I did not misunderstand. Or they'd say, you're being sensitive because you're disabled. But I know that I was being rational. My disability was used against me, used to deflect their judgments, used to look down on me. This worried me. Then I once asked my mother, why do some believe that those with disabilities cannot achieve or do anything of value? My mother said that you're experiencing bias and that graduating from university will solve everything. So I studied for my IB exams, but my career counselor discouraged me to apply to university. She said that I might get sick and because of this, will miss out a lot and will probably never be able to graduate. It turns out, during my IB studies, I actually got sick for 6 months. So it really did look like the words of my career counselor were proving true. I thought to myself, do I even have a future at any university? In Hong Kong, only 1% of young adults with a disability get into higher education. Statistics were against me, but my family encouraged me. My teacher applied for my exam extensions. My uncle applied for my university applications. My mom assisted me with some of my notes, and my father drove me to school and back home so that I would have more time to rest. They were the forms of ease to my hardship. My only focus was to complete my exams. Exam results day later came. I was too scared to check my results that I asked my parents to do so on my behalf. I thought that my mother's facial expression would give it away if I failed, so I stared at her, waiting for a reaction. My heart was pacing out of control at this point. On the inside, I was like, my heart is already underdeveloped, Ma. So have mercy. My mom smiled, but I was not sure if it was out of good news or if she was trying to find the words to comfort me. I was waiting for her words, but she touched my hand, extended her arms, wrapped them around mine into a hug, and said, "You got in." I got an offer for the University of Hong Kong. At university, there was a course called Understanding People with Disabilities. I obviously had to take that course. I mean, among potential students, who understands a person with a disability more than a student with a disability, right? In that course, we were taught the social model of disability. This theory states that those with physical disabilities face physical barriers and barriers from the attitudes of people. These include probably not being able to access a building or being talked down at. This theory suggests that those with disability, they are not the problem, but rather the way disability is perceived, that's the problem. This perception is shown through different tones and gestures. For example, one can say to a person with a disability, "Why are you even here? Shouldn't you be at home?" We would normally not talk to someone without a disability this way. So how and why is it okay to talk to someone with a disability this way? These attitudes are derogatory. It can lead those with disabilities to feel like they don't belong, like they don't have a voice. We are labeled as voiceless. Disability studies led me to see that no human likes to experience bias because it's harmful and it violates the dignity and vulnerability of any human being. This awareness led me to further embrace my whole self. Once we understand and embrace how we feel, once we don't question if it's okay to take part in something, once we look at our origin as a strength, we can hear our voice and rise. After graduating, I still went through bias. So graduating did not solve everything. I went through bias no matter the amount of articles I wrote, speaking engagements, and community work I did. Rather, whenever taking part in something, more of my vulnerabilities kept getting exposed. Whether it was through physical challenges, judgments, or even right now with the pandemic. But I've learned that having our vulnerabilities exposed is not bad. Because it is through our vulnerabilities we get to derive from our experiences a lot more. I realized this when writing poetry. I am at my most vulnerable when writing poetry, because this is when my raw feelings are exposed. I write poetry to cope, to understand the world around me, to understand how I feel. It is through poetry I derive from my experiences. Poetry is the ease to my hardships, because it's how I get to hear my voice, hear my inner child. The child that happily took part on sports day. The child that did not think twice. Poetry is how I channel my human experience. It's how I don't remain buried. But today, I will leave you with a poem. Voices of the underground, buried and thought to have no sound, left in darkness without light, told to stay out of sight, cracked open with little care. Why do people just watch and stare? Roots are forming, let us grow. We are meant for more than just sighs and woes. Life's storms may press us down, but that does not mean stay buried all year round. We are seeds that crack to grow. We have petals that are meant for show. We just have to make sure to voice, embrace our origins with rejoice, not feel ashamed of who we are. Hear our inner child that laughs to heal scars. This is when we can rise and bloom. Voices of the underground are not meant for doom.